Thanks. Minister, I'm happy to speak on this important but technical bill here today. As we know, the purpose of the bill is in part to provide access to funding sources by enabling the state to participate in European instruments designed to deal with economic impacts of COVID-19. One of the main instruments, of course, is the European Scheme for Temporary Support to mitigate unemployment risks in an emergency, or SURE. And just with respect to the SURE scheme, Minister, as I understand it from reporting in the Financial Times, at least 18 member states have submitted expressions of interests for loans totalling €94.5 billion from the SURE programme. This selling of almost €100 billion of new debt will make the EU the largest issuer of bonds in Europe, aside from the national governments. This, in addition to the €50 billion of bonds that are outstanding, most of which were used to fund loans to Ireland during the debt crisis. From what I can see, these bonds will then be backed by a system of voluntary guarantees from the EU's national governments worth €25 billion. Can you provide some clarity about what exactly is the nature of Ireland's relationship to the voluntary guarantee aspect of the SURE scheme? I think this is important because we need to know if Ireland is going to be financially exposed, given the high levels of Europe-wide debt that are about to be created. The Minister of State, Deputy Fleming, did accept during a debate on this bill in the Seanad recently that one of the most important and most prudent conditions on the instrument includes the requirement that no more than 10% of all loans will fall due for payment in any 1 year. He also mentioned that one of the benefits of this guarantee mechanism is that it ensures member states do not have to pay any money up front. But again, what I would like here is more detail on when the money will have to be repaid and when does the period of not upfront run out. I also want to acknowledge that there is a sense among some EU observers that while the SURE scheme does go some way toward creating much-needed lending capacity, it is far too modest to have a significant impact on the EU's fiscal response to the COVID-19 crisis. According to the Bruegel Institute, for example, the main limitation of SURE is that it solves the wrong problem. They also note that access to finance is not an issue for euro area countries at this stage, thanks in particular to the massive intervention by the European Central Bank since mid-March, and that if access to finance were to become a real problem for some countries, SURE would then become too small. I raise this particular aspect of the problem, Minister, because I think our capacity to access finance here in Ireland will certainly become more of an issue in the months and indeed the years that lie ahead. What I'm referring to here is, of course, the rather sizable elephant in the room, namely the scale of our national debt. We know from the Oireachtas Parliamentary Budget Office that Ireland's debt to GDP ratio is currently 59% and that this is below the EU average and the 60% threshold set by the Stability and Growth Pact. However, using a more appropriate measure of economic activity for Ireland, GNI, the debt to GNI ratio is 100.2%, significantly higher than the EU average. I do have concerns, Minister, that because we are now part of the voluntary guarantee aspect of the SURE scheme, that any future exposure, as I said before, might make life very difficult for us. And Minister, I'd just like to conclude by referring to the VAT rate of 13.5%, which was increased from the 9%. I just want to ask, will this be lowered? Because in our tourism sector, businesses are really struggling, and I know that many hairdressing businesses also are trying to get back on their feet, trying to rebuild their business after a significant period of unprecedented disruption. So I would just ask you, will that be sought? I understand the government hasn't the power to reduce the VAT rate, but I'm just wondering, will you seek to make efforts to lower that VAT rate? I'd be grateful if you could answer those questions.
Thank you, Deputy.